Good afternoon. Take your seats, please. I'm going to grab a bottle of water back here. Okay, can the good folks at Pease hear me? Pease on the screen, can you hear me? Thumbs up. We're trying something high-tech here with Skype. Well, it is a great honor to be here with Team McConnell today. Chief Williams and I get to do a lot of traveling, and it absolutely is our most favorite thing, because what we get a chance to do is come out and do two, I think, very critically important things. The first one is to thank you, all of your families, the civic leaders, for what we as a team are doing for our nation and for the free world. So everybody in this room, regardless of what type of suit or outfit or uniform you wear, are directly or indirectly part of the greatest military the world has ever seen. We're the most capable, most professional, combat-ready force in the history of the world. And I'd like to say I'm in a unique position to tell you that, because I just spent 2 years in NATO as a NATO officer representing 28 allied nations and watching what you all did from the European soil of Belgium. And I watched what our United States Air Force did as a total force in places like Kosovo. Yes, we're still there after 13 years. In counter-piracy, yes, we're doing that too. In Iraq, in Afghanistan, in the skies over Libya, and in many other countries on the European and African continents. And I can tell you that the United States Air Force, as a total force, is the envy of the world. In NATO, we are by far the largest and most respected Air Force. The Air Forces of the 27 other NATO member nations together, combined, are a fraction of our United States Air Force. The entire British military, let me repeat that, the entire British military, a nation which once ruled the waves at the turn of the century 2 centuries ago, is smaller than 18th Air Force. We are the world's only superpower for the free world. And you all volunteered to be part of that wonderful institution called the United States Air Force. And I'm very proud to stand here and tell you how great you are, because you are, and to thank you for what you're doing. Now, there's going to be, obviously, changes in the future. And as the Chief and I have gone around to bases in the Pacific and the CONUS, and we're about to go to Europe and the Middle East here, starting on Sunday on a long trip, to thank Air Mobility Command Airmen that are in the EUCOM and Central Command areas of responsibility, there's changes afoot. In the Wichita area, as you all know, the Boeing plant across the runway, the Boeing company has announced that that facility will largely be shut down. So that's on the commercial side of Wichita. Across the United States government, of which we are all employees of the United States government, paid for by the United States taxpayer, the United States has a problem. We have accrued a tremendous amount of national debt, especially over the past 50 years, and that debt is rising rapidly. So Congress and the American people have asked the United States military to take some share of the budget reductions that have to take place if we're going to balance our national checkbook. None of us have the luxury of being able to spend more money than we take in. Our government, unfortunately, has spent more money than it's taken in, and our national debt is somewhere north of $15 trillion, and it's growing very fast. So last summer, Congress passed a law, the Budget Control Act, and they told the Department of Defense that we have to reduce our budget between now and the year 2020 by $487 billion. At the same time, the Department of Defense was working on a new national strategy for Defense, which was rolled out in January, called the Defense Strategic Guidance. And I would highly encourage you, if you haven't read that document, it's only about 12 pages. You can Google it and download it under Defense Strategic Guidance. And that document, which is signed out by the President and the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, tells the nation, tells the world very openly what our national defense policy and strategy is going to be for the next decade and beyond. It's a living document, meaning it can be adjusted and changed as the world situation dictates. And in that document, it makes it very clear that the United States military is going to have to share some of the burden on debt reduction. And I already mentioned $487 billion in cuts. 3 weeks ago, the President submitted his 2013 total federal budget request to Congress. Part of that budget is a defense budget. Over the next 8, 10, 12 months, you never know how long this is going to take, Congress will debate that budget, the entire budget, of which the largest share of money that does not go towards entitlement programs like Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid is the defense budget, and that will be debated like it is every year. But in that budget, we begin to see the resourcing and the changes that tie back to that defense strategic guidance. And in the 2013 budget request, the United States Air Force is asking Congress to approve and the President ultimately to sign into law the beginning of the changes to enact that guidance, which includes somewhere in the neighborhood of about 300 aircraft to retire in 2013, and a total force, active guard and reserve, reduction in military end strength by close to 10,000 people. And there's lots of ways that we are going to manage that on the people side. We'll manage that through fewer people coming in the military for a couple of years. We'll manage it by involuntary and voluntary separation programs. And in some cases, as some of you have seen, we can do selective early retirement. On the civilian side, we've got tools like VERA VSIP. The reductions that are coming to place in the mobility air forces, what we do for a living in Air Mobility Command, the MAF, is on the order of about half of those airplane cuts. So we're asking Congress to let the United States Air Force retire all remaining C-5A models. These were airplanes purchased in the late 60s and early 1970s. They're our highest time least performing C-5s, 27 of them. We're going to retire about 60 C-130s, asked to. We're going to retire 20 KC-135s. And we've asked to retire the entire new fleet of C-27Js, which we bought to do direct airlift support to the Army and the Marine Corps. We will do that mission with C-130s. And believe it or not, it's more effective and cheaper to do it with an airplane we already have proliferated in the inventory than to buy a new fleet of airplanes to do that mission. So that's what's happening from the 50,000-foot level in Washington, D.C., and how it affects us. How it is going to affect us as individual airmen will play out over time. As we continue to figure out how big, how many, how fast, how far our military is going to be in the future, realize there's a lot of future decisions that have to be made. Every single dollar we spend in the Department of Defense is under review. All you have to do is watch the news, pick up Air Force Times, Army Times, Marine Corps Times, Navy Times, watch the news. Everything is being looked at, and that's a good thing, because we have to make sure that every dollar we spend is a dollar well spent, that we squeeze out the most effectiveness for the mission and the most efficiency for the taxpayer from every dollar we spend. We spend a lot of money in the Department of Defense and the Air Force and in this command. Yesterday, I asked our fuel efficiency office at Scott Air Force Base to give me a couple of anecdotes about one of our major cost categories, and that's how much we spend on jet fuel. Folks, if this doesn't make you sit up and listen, nothing will. In the mobility air forces, active guard and reserve, every minute of every day, we spend $11,300 on jet fuel alone. So you can do the mental math here. Think about what it costs to fill up your car, your pickup truck, your RV, your motorcycle, and think about that at the tune of $11,300 a minute. It's a huge amount of money. And that's what jet fuel at $3.82 a gallon. As the price of fuel goes up at the gas pump, so does the price of jet fuel go up. So this is really serious stuff. So this is a time where we need all of you to be innovative, to think about how we could be more efficient and effective, and get that information up to the leadership. Get it up to your wing commander, get it up to the Chief Williams and I, and we will make sure that no good idea is going to be left unturned. You all are the innovators. You all make this mission happen. You're out there on the front lines every day, and every one of you has an idea of how we do things poorly and how we can do things much better. We need to know about all that. You are the ideas. You are the innovators of this nation. I've been doing this 30 years. I joke about this, but I have not had an original idea for 10 years. I gave up when my daughters were teenagers. That sucked the life out of me. So we need you to be the innovators because you are. And I've seen 100 examples of that at this base today. I've talked to people with a fire in their belly who understand what it means to serve their nation. They understand what it means to innovate. They understand what it means to get the job done better than it's ever been done before. My job, Chief's job, our job together, along with the folks at Higher Headquarters at Scott Air Force Base, is to give you what you need to implement those ideas. That's what keeps me going. That's why I still love what I do. The fire in my belly is to try to help you do your job. That's how I feel I can best serve the nation today. When it comes to us as individual airmen, in the end, the reason why we are the greatest military on the face of the earth is because we are the sum of all of our parts. You are those parts. So everybody I come across, to include my wife, wants to know where we are going with everything from our pay to our retirement programs to our benefits, to include education, health care, and the answer is nobody knows. But go back to what I told you about 5 minutes ago. Somewhere in the Pentagon, somewhere in our major commands, somebody is looking at every dollar we spend, and that's a good thing. Everything we do has to be reviewed in times of a decreasing budget. Just out of curiosity, how many people in this hangar came in the Air Force September 11, 2001 to the present, so the last 11 years? Okay, I'm going to take a guess and say 2/3 to 80%. You all have been in this Air Force during a period of time where our budget has only been going up. What you're seeing now is a cycle where we have peaked in terms of this era of military spending, and real reductions are starting to take place. That is causing a lot of unease in the force. We understand that. But it is what our nation has told us we have to do. We have to bring the cost down. So I would offer you this. As a chief and I talk to a lot of different audiences, big group like this, small groups, the question comes up, what can we do to make sure that if we want to make this Air Force a career, what do we have to do to make sure that that happens? And I'm going to offer you some very simple advice that I will tell you if you were to come back in this room 50 years from now and listen to the 18th Air Force commander, they would tell you the same thing. If you'd been in this hangar 20 years ago when 18th Air Force didn't exist, the commander of 15th Air Force would have told you the same thing, which is you have to be the best airman you can be. You have to understand that the American people hold us to an incredibly high standard. As an institution, we are not employees with a job. We are members of the profession of arms, and we serve an institution that the American people hold the highest regard for of all professional institutions in our nation. We are held higher than any other profession, to include firefighters, policemen, doctors, nurses, lawyers, congressmen, the President of the United States. That is a pretty high bar that we have set for ourselves. Do not let that bar slip. So all of us, individually, because only we can do this for ourselves in the end, is to make ourselves the best citizen, the best civil servant, the best airman we can be by being all we can be. I would ask that all of you go back, look yourself in the mirror, go to your command section of your unit, ask them to give you a printout of your CERF, your one-page career resume. And I would offer that if there's a block on that CERF, whether it be education, civil or PME, tech training, language training, anything that makes you a better professional airman in this institution called the Air Force, if you haven't done it, then do it. If you haven't done it, you are late to need, because those around you have probably already done so and you are behind the power curve. And while we have all these incredible benefits out there, from GI Bill to educational benefits for both ourselves and our family members, take advantage of it while those benefits still exist, because I don't know, Chief doesn't know, nobody knows what is going to happen 3, 5 years, 10 down the road. We just don't know. Budgetary pressures are going to have an effect. I had the great benefit early in my career of having several incredibly good senior officers kick me in the tush and tell me just that. And I did not know how profound what they told me was until about 10 years ago when I stepped back and went, wow, I'm a better person, I'm more valuable to the institution, and a funny thing happened about that point in my career. We reached a point 20 years ago where the United States Air Force downsized 60%. We went from 700,000 active duty airmen to about the strength we are today in a very few short years after the fall of the Soviet Union and the Cold War ended. The cuts that we have coming pale in comparison to that 60% reduction. And the way you weather these storms is to be the best you can be. I got one last topic I want to cover before I turn it over to questions here, and I really am interested in what's on your mind. And it's a kind of a tough subject, which is resiliency, and I think where we are today in our American culture. We have this wonderful thing today called information age and information technology. And I don't think there's anybody in this hangar that doesn't own a BlackBerry or an iPhone or an iPad or some sort of a instant visual, verbal, and text messaging device. I'd be shocked if you didn't. Everybody has one. And they're a wonderful, wonderful tool when used correctly. And I bring this up because I go back to the discussion I just had about institution and the fact that we're held in very high stead by the American people. And we don't want to endanger that relationship because we took an oath to serve the American people and support and defend the Constitution. And what I'm trying to get at here is very simple. There are individuals, very few thankfully, but there's individuals across our military, all services, that don't understand how damaging social networking can be to the institution. It is perfectly acceptable and even encouraged for us to tell our story to the American people. It's very acceptable for us to send a text message to our wife or our husband or our mom or dad or aunt and uncle saying, hey, just got back from a great deployment. I learned a lot. I saved 8 lives at a Casevac center. You know, we did a great job refueling airplanes. But when we start getting into too much information, We start sending pictures of the checkpoint we worked out and the faces of the people who work next to us, and start talking about what our equipment is and how many people are defending this checkpoint, to some other really horrific things like you saw with places like Abu Ghraib. We instantly, singly, or with a few airmen, or soldiers, or sailors, or Marines, become strategic airmen in that we start to damage the institution that we've all volunteered to uphold. So I just ask you to be very careful with the wonderful media opportunities that we have today. When we volunteered to join this great institution, realize that we gave up some of the things that we can do if we weren't in this uniform. We are held to a higher standard. We have to hold ourselves to a higher standard. So before you start taking pictures and emailing them, before you start texting, or before you start making phone calls, stop and think about the broader picture of the institution. I don't want to end this on a downer note. I want to end it on a very positive note, and that is how I started. I've given you some broad areas to think about, and I probably could pose more questions to you than I can answer. But thank you for what you have done as an institution and as airmen. The United States Air Force has been in continuous combat going on 21 years in Southwest Asia. The mobility air forces, the tanker community in particular, got there first, has been there the longest, and we're going to be the last out the door. And that's the nature of our business. Team McConnell set a record last year for flying hours in the KC-135 community, 46,000 hours. My guess is when this weapon system was in Strategic Air Command, the entire Strategic Air Command probably did not fly that many tanker hours in 1 year. That is the nature of our business. We are in high demand. And here's why. When General Jumper was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, he made a very simple comment when somebody asked him one day why we needed a new tanker. And he said, because what makes our nation a military superpower in the post-Cold War era is air refueling. And 92% of our air refueling capability is in the KC-135. And this is the last remaining super tanker wing in the world, right here at Team McConnell. So you all are the stewards of an incredible resource. Make sure you understand that our nation expects us to be great stewards of this resource and this institution, and to take great care of each other. We are a family. And I'm very proud to be part of that family, and I'm very proud to stand up here today. Chief and I are both very proud to stand up here today and stand shoulder to shoulder with you as we move forward into the 21st century. We have got some challenges ahead. We are going to deal with them as we always have. 20 years ago, a lot of pundits said we were going to hollow out the Air Force by cutting it 60%. We would never be able to fight and win another war again. I would offer that in the last 2 decades, the United States Air Force has not only proved them wrong, we are even better than anybody had ever thought because of how great you are and how great we are as a team. I am honored to be here to watch Team McConnell, and I say Team McConnell, both active guard and reserve. You all have got it figured out here. We are going to keep calling on you every single day to do what you've been doing in the past until the nation says the war is over. I don't think we're ever going to be there. So be ready for that call, as you always have been and you always will be. I know you're not going to let the nation down. Okay, thank you all very much. I will open it up to any questions now. I think we lost the Skype connection with Pease. Oh well. There's microphones running around, and if you can't wait for a microphone, scream it out and I'll repeat your question. And the rule I told your wing commander is you have to ask me 26 questions before I'll let you leave.
How you doing, sir? Staff Sergeant Jake Williams, 22nd AMXS. The one question that I got is, why do enablers fill AEF positions, yet people in the AEF positions can't turn around and fill the positions for enablers?
Say that one more time and a little slower, because there's an echo.
Yes, sir. My question was, why do enablers fill AEF positions? On the flip side, why can't AEF positions or personnel fill enabler positions?
I don't think I have a good answer to that. Give me an example.
Well, the only example I got here at McConnell, in the maintenance world, we can fill positions anywhere. As enablers, we can go out the door and back many times in a year, whereas people in the AF, I guess, bands or buckets, they go maybe once every so often. Well, if they shortfall, we, as enablers, they can call for a manning assist or whatnot, and then they can send us, since we are not in a specific band or bucket, to help them out.
I think I got it. Let me try this. Let me repeat back to what you said a different way and tell me if I got this right. So you're an AMXS, right?
Yes, sir.
So what is your specialty?
I'm an electrician.
Okay. So sit down. So I think the short answer is your life in AMXS is tied to the tails. So we are going to provide tails in KC-135 to the combatant commanders, and unfortunately don't have the luxury of telling them no. So to a large degree, the aircrew maintenance world and all those who are directly involved in launching and recovering aircraft are driven by a different tempo that really is outside, in many cases, of the whole AEF construct. The rest of the AEF construct, or AFSC, is built around deployment cycles, and there's tempo banding that goes on to tell those airmen, depending on their AFSC, that if they're high demand, low numbers of AFSCs, we've got people who dwell to deploy as 1-to-1. If they're gone for 6 months, they're only home for 6 months, and they go back again. Some people are home for 5 times as much time as they're deployed. The bottom line is there's always going to be a mismatch between the AEF buckets and the cycles and the demand signal. AEF is a binning of capabilities that the United States Air Force owns that we try to match against what the combatant commanders demand us to do, but we can never make those things equal. It's just not possible. We build the AEF buckets and the capabilities around war plans that we may or may not ever fight, but it's our best guess at what we have to do. But we deploy based on what the combatant commanders are doing right now. So there's a difference between fight tonight and fight in 5 or 10 years. We are resourced to do AEFs to do the future fight, not today's fight. If you recall, Secretary Rumsfeld was testifying a few years ago in front of the Hill, and a similar question was asked of him. And he made the comment that, well, as you know, we fight tonight with what we have at our bases. And he got kind of reviled in the media for that, but that's the right answer. We're going to fight tonight with you all. But we're going to build the force 5 or 10 years from now based on that defense strategic guidance and what the war plans are on the shelf. We hope we get it right. We've gotten it right one time. I can think of one war we predicted. Not only we predicted it happening, but how we were going to fight back, and that was in the Pacific with Japan 70 years ago. The rest of them were just, where did that come from? So, did I answer your question? I gave you a real high-level look. Okay. I told your squadron commanders at lunch that you all need to start talking about AEF next and how that's going to have an effect on how we do deployments and how we do not only the deployment piece, but how we do the training leading up to deployments. And AEF next is going to be rolled out, and instituted in the next year and a half to 2 years. So that will have some help on that as well. Was part of your question about the joint expeditionary taskings, the JET taskings, the things that we do for other services? How many folks have done a JET deployment, by the way? Okay. I mean, the good news is those are shrinking. They were pretty much halved when we pulled out of Iraq, and they're continuing to go down in Afghanistan. I think we peaked out at about 9,000 airmen per cycle in JET taskings a few years ago, and now we're down to about 2,500. So those will continue to whittle down, thankfully. So thanks for serving those. I know they're no deployment's easy. Those are particularly tough, especially if you're doing something outside of your career field, but it is a good broadening piece. Okay, that's one. We only have 25 left.
Senior Airman Cody Noble, 22nd FSS Fitness Center. You were saying that the downside, we are losing so many airplanes, we're losing so many personnel. Well, with the personnel side, what are some major factors in deciding who comes, who goes, who stays? Who decides that, and who picks those people out to go?
I think there's two pieces to answer that. Piece number one is some very smart people in the Pentagon and the MAGCOMs have already figured out programmatically what we're going to look like once the cuts are laid in. So we're going to know literally by AFSC, by grade, by skill level, officer enlisted, civilian, what the Air Force will look like at the end of each fiscal year. That's on the manpower side. That's the requirement side. And that's easy, believe it or not. When you take down aircraft, it's very simple algorithms that say if I get rid of 12 C-130s, there's this many aircrew, this many maintainers, this many intel, this many AFE folks that I don't need on the books. The much harder part is managing the implementation of those cuts. So, as I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of tools that we're going to use. What we did 20 years ago, every time there's been a reduction, is a whole series of things. Congress has to give us authorities to do most of those, and they already have. So the easiest thing to do is to under-access people. We will do less recruiting, and we'll run less people through OTS, ROTC, and BMTS, Lackland. But that's only part of the solution set. If we only shut down the pipeline in, we're going to end up with the wrong skill levels and the wrong AFSCs over time. Realize the Air Force as a conveyor belt. It's moving at the speed of the rotation of the Earth. We need a certain number of people on that conveyor belt at different stages of its life cycle, rank, skill levels, AFSCs, to go to war to do what our nation wants us to do. So to manage that, you have to manage the beginning of that conveyor belt, which is accessions and training, BMTS type stuff. And then you also have to look at steps along the way. So things like DOS rollback is a tool that we use. For folks who have got 20 years in selective early retirement. Unfortunately, for some folks on the officer side who weren't promotable and have been more than twice deferred, they were not selectively continued. We may have to do what we did 20 years ago, which is we may have to offer voluntary separation pays, lump sum or a series of payments. So all of those programs we have asked Congress the authority to do, that's all for the Pentagon to manage. So they're going to have to use a whole series of tools to bring this down. What a lot of people don't understand is, and you got to help me out here, is I don't think it's going to affect McConnell directly, but if I'm at a base, let's say that's got C-130s, and that C-130 unit at my base is one of the units that we're going to close, those airmen and civilians naturally think, oh, I go away. No. The billet you're in goes off the books. You will be cross-trained. You will be asked to leave. You'll be asked to retire. You'll be given a career job reservation. There's 100 different tools we'll use. So you have to take away the billet from the individual who's sitting in it at that present time. Hopefully that answers the question. So I've seen this movie play out. The most difficult thing we do is manage these types of drawdowns. It's also very difficult to manage upswings in manpower. We've done that as well too in the last 10 years. It's these cycles that's very hard for us to manage because there's so many things that we can't control. We may get a lot of people who just go, in 2 years go, the economy's great, I'm walking out the door. We can't control that. We'd like to think we can, but we can't. We have to take our best guess and try to manage it as best we can. Right there.
Sir, Staff Sergeant Faye Monahan, 22nd FSS Fitness Center. I've heard some rumors about a 15-year retirement where you only get possibly 30% instead of the full amount. I was wondering if you had some information on if that's true or not.
Yeah, again, it goes back to, I mentioned this earlier in broad brushstroke. There are 20 million ideas out there about retirement programs and benefits. What I did mention was the Undersecretary of the Air Force, who's brilliant, a lady by the name of Erin Connaughton, has been nominated by the President to be the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. She's being asked to do that job because her specialty is looking at pay and benefits. Probably the single most involved part of the military are all of the people programs. We have literally thousands of people programs. Every single one of those is being looked at. In my career, I have seen 2 new retirement programs enacted, and the second of the new ones was tweaked after they implemented it. So I've kind of seen 2.5 changes to the retirement program since I came in. What I've always seen in these changes is they're grandfathered. So when you came in, nobody's going to come to you and say, gee, we're really sorry, but we're changing your entire retirement program. There's nothing you can do about it. When we've gone back and changed retirement programs for people who are currently in uniform, what we've done is offered options, where we said you can keep the current retirement program, or if you've watched Let's Make a Deal, or you can choose what's behind door number 2, and you can take a $30,000 payment and right now to put in the bank and accept 10% less when you retire. But there hasn't been a major wholesale change to the program once you signed up. I think you're going to see that type of thing offered. There's a major principle spelled out, and again, go read the Defense Strategic Guidance. There's 4 principles in that document that the President and Secretary of Defense said are absolutely paramount to this strategy. Principle number 1 is we are not going to undermine the all-volunteer force. We have been an all-volunteer force for 40 years this year when we got rid of the draft after Vietnam. So nobody's going to do anything to endanger the enticement of us to want to serve our nation in uniform and stay in service to our nation in uniform. Are there going to be changes? Yeah, we have to. We're spending a lot of money. Something that gets very emotional, it's in this year's budget, it's in every year's budget, is for TRICARE, for example, we're asking the retirees, those who are already retired, to pay more upfront every year as a lump sum payment for TRICARE and more for co-payments for doctor's visits, prescriptions, those kind of things. It gets very emotional. I personally don't mind doing that because our health care program, trust me, TRICARE is the envy of the world. It is the best managed health care on the planet for many reasons, not the least of which, as your medical group commander will tell you, is there's no ceiling. There's no limit on how much money our nation will spend on your health care and your family's health care. That may change as well. But right now, it's a great program. So a long answer that should have been a short answer is everything is on the table. I've heard as many different rumors as you have, but I failed to mention this. Please realize this, okay? This is kind of Civics 101 about your government. I mentioned the President's budget that went to the Hill a few weeks ago requested the airplane reductions, 9,900 personnel reductions. That is not soup yet. That is a request. When Congress gonculates it this year and eventually approves an authorization bill and an appropriations bill, authorization says, we allow you to go do this. An appropriations bill is, here's the check. When the President signs those 2 bills into law, then it's soup. Right now, it's a conversation with the American people. So you're going to hear all sorts of rumors thousands, tens of thousands of rumors this year. This year will be particularly interesting politically. Our process is wonderful. That's what a democracy does. We debate things. This will be a particularly heated debate this year because, again, this is the beginning of the reductions. It's total force, and it is an election year. So just take all that into consideration, take a deep breath, and then when things are actually soup, trust me, you'll be the first to know because you're going to get it from leadership. But keep reading. 24? Chief counts for me here. 23, you're right. I can't count.
Sir, Lieutenant Lanning from the 22nd Communications Squadron. I'm reading a question from the folks out at Peace.
Okay, good, I couldn't see you. Go ahead.
Sorry, sir, standing up. From the 64th Air Refueling Squadron. With a strategic shift to the Pacific, do you see AMC supporting additional exercise and requirements in the Pacific region in the next 2 years?
I don't know about the next two, but logically over the next decade, yeah. There's lots of reasons for this Asia-Pacific shift. And the largest reason, quite frankly, is because of the shift in world economic power. If you look at the world today, we account for about 25% of the world's economic power in the United States. Europe and Eastern Europe, the European Union account for 25%, and the Asia-Pacific Rim, mainly, but not limited to India and China, account for the other half. So that is where the action is. The United States has been nurturing relationships there for a very long time, and in essence, we've kind of put Asia Pacific a little bit on the back burner as we've done Southwest Asia, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and there's obviously some interesting countries in that region. But as we come out of Afghanistan, the strategic focus is going to shift a little bit more to Asia Pacific. There, strategically, we're looking at basing of Marines more spread out around the Pacific Rim. The Navy is going to be home porting some of their ships more in the Pacific region. Places like Diego Garcia, Singapore, Australia, the Philippines will take on more strategic importance. And the reason why is simple. If you go pull up a Mercator projection of the Earth, where you see the Earth's surface flattened out, and take a look at just how big the Pacific theater is, and ask yourself this question: how many airfields and seaports in that part of the world are actually on sovereign American territory today? And the answer is not many. We have Alaska, which is part of the Pacific Rim, and the Aleutian Islands. We have Hawaii, we have Midway, and we have Guam. That's it. Everything else belongs to somebody else, and we're just a guest, to include Diego Garcia. That's British. So we are going to nurture relationships in that region with more and more, albeit small, presence. And then we're having a huge debate strategically about what to place at Guam on a permanent basis. But I think we're going to see, for the foreseeable future, we're going to continue to rotate bomber, fighter, and tanker forces through Guam TDY. So I don't think we're going to see a huge shift for us, but I think we're going to be seeing, as the questioner asked, there are more exercises out in that part of the world. If you get a chance to watch C-SPAN, I realize some of it's not very exciting, but this is the season where the combatant commanders do congressional testimony. And Admiral Willard, who's the Pacific Command commander, was testifying last night. He was alluding to the fact that he's going to try to get more exercises out there, but guess what? They cost money too. So there's a limit to how many of those we're going to do.
General, A1C, Michael Group, 22nd AMXS. I was just wondering, what do you believe your biggest contribution to the Air Force has been during your career in the military?
My individual? Well, that's a really good question. I never even thought of that one. I was going to say hanging around long enough. I don't have a good answer. You stumped me on that one. I can tell you what my single biggest contribution to the world is in my life. I have got 3 amazing daughters that I love to pieces. And I'll do anything for them. I've spoiled them to death. So I've left the world, you're a medical guy, I've left the world with 2 nurses so far, and if the third one continues to do well, she'll be a physical therapist. So I'm doing my share to help TRICARE. I can't answer that question. I mentioned up front, I'm still doing this because I have a fire in my belly to want to make sure that the institution that I love continues to do well. And I am so proud and so amazed at what you guys do every day. I can't talk much more because I get choked up, but honestly, I mean that. As I said, I've had the privilege of serving in Europe twice and being able to look back at our country and our military from 4,000 miles away. And it gives you a totally different perspective of what we do. And then when you interact with other countries and they learn what you do, it makes you even more proud of what we accomplish. I'm just happy to be part of that group. I don't think I've made one single individual major achievement other than the fact that I'm part of the same team that you're on. And I wake every morning loving it. And the further I can get away from my office, the more I love it. Okay, 21. And I did a lousy job answering that question. Here and here. Let's do the back one first real quick. I think he had his hand up first, but hold on.
Sir, Sergeant Cofield from 22 OG. So with all these cuts in personnel, money, and equipment, are we going to see a realistic cut in operations based on an acceptance of being able to do less with less?
Boy, I hope so. But I don't hold any hope that that's going to happen. Which is why I said we have to keep being innovative. We're at a quandary here, and we've been here before, which is, especially in the mobility air forces, nothing happens until something moves, and we make it move. We're the first in, the last out. And the combatant commanders are continuing to have a demand signal that until somebody in Washington, D.C. says, no, you can't do that, because they're the ones telling them to do that, we're not in a position to say no. We do that sometimes, but not to a great success. We may be able to trim the number of aircraft or people we have deployed to go do something. We can work around the margins, but the demand signal is not something we can control. The good news is, if you look at the cuts that I talked about and the ops tempo that we've been doing for the past 11 years, and 2011, I don't have to tell you all, was a very big year, 46,000 flying hours. We can still do that in the future without really much of a change for Team McConnell and other bases based on the cuts we're laying in. 20 less KC-135s, we're still pushing almost 400 aircraft across the total force. So percentage-wise of the total force, it's a very small cut. And again, I'll go back to 20 years ago to give you all a perspective. We cut 60% of our force. In 1986 or 7, I believe it was, we kind of reached the high water mark in the United States Air Force as far as total size, total force structure in the Cold War, the entire Cold War. When I was, about the time I pinned on captain in 1986, we had over 8,000 fighter aircraft. We will finish the end of next year with these budget cuts at somewhere around 1,700, and yet we're still doing what the nation wants us to do. So will we be a little bit busier individually? Maybe, but it's going to be small compared to the big picture.
Sir, Captain Meeks, 350th Air Refueling Squadron. In today's Air Force, we find ourselves doing many jobs that aren't necessarily related to our career field. What would you say is your most interesting duty or position in your 30 years?
Oh my God, I think I've done every additional duty there is. I've been a pubs officer, a tax control officer, telephone control officer. We used to have to do telephone logs, that was fun. Financial control officer, OER, OPR officer. What are we at today? What was the old form? Whatever came before OERs and OPRs. It was the efficiency reports, whatever they were called. when we used to have the brand new word processors that you had to have COBOL Fortran trained to use. I think I've done it all. But you bring up a point that I got to talk about for a second. One of the things that's, remember I said we're flipping over every rock about manpower positions and money. And one of the things that has gotten the attention of the 4-stars in the Air Force is making sure that as we go through the next couple of years, the next decade, that we are mindful of the fact that the basic morale, welfare, institutional, professional unit of the Air Force is a squadron. That's how we organize to fight, is a squadron. And there's a realization that we have hit squadrons pretty hard, especially on the commander support staff. So we've only increased the number of additional duties, and at the same time we've cut commander support staff in the last decade by 50%. So that is a topic that is playing out at the highest levels of the Air Force about making sure that we get this right. And I think what's going to wind up happening is we're going to start putting some people back in squadrons to make sure they can do some of these additional duties and ancillary tasks that in some cases law requires us to do. Although I don't think law required me to be a telephone control officer, but I did it anyway because I was told to. So that's being looked at very closely. At AMC, this is one of the 3 or 4 big projects that my predecessor, General Allardyce, who's now the vice commander of AMC, is working on to make sure we try to get it right. I think you're going to see some folks coming back into squadrons to do those type of jobs. How we doing? I'm getting the one more question. Right there.
Tech Sergeant Jim Smith from your base chapel. Sir, I want to piggyback on what you just talked about, and I just want to ask you, do you think putting people like the chaplains and the assistants and all the other director of staff agencies into a squadron would free us up to go take care of the airmen that we're called to serve?
Say the last part again, I missed it.
If you put people like the chaplains and all the rest of the director of staff agencies back into squadrons for support, rolled us in, would that free us up by removing additional duties and allowing us to go take care of our primary core competencies and take care of airmen?
I'd have to think about that for a while. That's a new thought. But the first thing that hit my brain was we don't have enough of you all to carve up to put in every squadron. Is that kind of what you're getting at, or no? Give him back the microphone real quick.
Sir, not to put us out in each additional squadron, not to spread us out and farm us out to each one, but to wrap us into one so that all of our additional duties can get dispersed amongst the squadron, such as finance manager, facility manager, et cetera, so I can go focus on taking care of airmen.
I got that, and I completely missed your point. I understand now because Chief explained it to me before you did. That is exactly what the Healthy Unit Squadron Initiative is looking at. Remember I said the basic unit is a squadron, is do we have the wing group squadron structures right at each of our bases? And owing to the fact that we think the basic unit that the entire Air Force should be built upon are squadrons. The example, quite frankly, is the Army. The Army doesn't do anything unless you're in a company. That is the basic fighting unit of the Army, the company and the platoon. And I'll be a little bit facetious here to make a point. The Army, if you're going to send in an infantry company, it can't go by itself. You have to have a headquarters company go with it because it contains you. It contains the people who make the rest of that organization run. It's the combat support and combat service support unit that goes with the combat unit. So that's part of this healthy unit piece that they're looking at. And again, it comes back to every single body we would move or change or increase, it's a zero-sum game. It has to come from somewhere. So we have to source it from internal. The reason why we're looking at the healthy unit thing to begin with was the piece you mentioned, but it was also because one of the internal Air Force studies last year said we can take yet another cut in current squadrons commander support staff. And we all went, you're kidding. So General Schwartz directed that the MAGCOMs go take a look at this. And we did, and when they came back together, we said, not only can you not take a cut, we need to put about 1,300 people back in those support staffs in all Air Force squadrons, depending on how big they are. And then go back to the point that you made, that's part of it as well. So the truth lies somewhere between taking a cut, which nobody agrees with, except people who do cuts for a living, and the general officers and the chiefs who are going, wait a minute, let's put some people back. I can tell you the biggest proponent of this are the chiefs, especially Chief Roy. He's really watching this carefully, the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. So he's all over this piece, okay? So don't, on all this stuff, don't expect changes overnight. We're part of a bureaucracy and a very big institution. It's going to take time for all this to play out. And in the end, we have to find people and we have to find money to do all this. We are all supported by one thing, the dollar. Okay? Am I out of time? Okay. I'm getting the hook by your wing commander. I apologize. Hey, the peace folks have dropped off video, right? But they can hear us. Do they have any more questions? Go ahead and throw it out here real quick. Use the mic. I can't hear you.
Sir, the last question that the folks from Peace have is, do you see educational and tuition assistance being cut? And if so, is it going to be substantial?
Honestly, I don't know. It goes back to everything being on the table. All I can offer you is this. It's there right now. There is no time like the present to get it done. I mean, I'm not trying to be trite. That is as honest and as open as I can be. They're looking at everything. And as I mentioned, we want to retain the all-volunteer force. And I know a lot of folks in this room, I'm one of them, has taken full advantage of the opportunities the Air Force has afforded over the years. And it's all changed over time. There's a whole lot more great benefits out there than I had 30 years ago as a second lieutenant. I don't know how long they're going to be around. I really hope they're around for a very long time because I think that's one of the great things that helps us recruit and train and retain the best airmen and families in the world. But something's got to give, and that's going to be looked at. So while it's here now, go do it. I expect the education office to get very busy tomorrow because every place I've been, and I've said this, the wing commander called me back the next day and said, what did you do? My education center, they're standing in line 20 deep. Well, make it 30. Go over there and sign up. Just, you know, how many people have watched Larry the Cable Guy? What does he tell you? Get her done. Go get her done. There's no time like the present to get her done. Listen, it's been an honor to be here today. As I said up front, thank you, and this energizes us. This keeps the chief and I going, living in our cubicles up at Scott Air Force Patch. The sky is not falling, folks. We're going to remain the world's premier military. We're going to be a little bit smaller in the future. We're going to have a little bit less capacity, but we're going to retain the capabilities that this nation needs to get the job done. And in the end, it's all about one thing, winning. We are not going to let this nation down. This nation is going to fight and win the wars that the American people ask us to do, and we're going to get her done. I just ask you to be the best airman you can be. Keep the institutional bar raised high, and make sure that when you pass along the legacy to the airman who comes behind you, that you've raised the bar a little bit higher and done the job a little bit better and set a higher standard. That's what we need you to do. That's what we demand that you do. That's what keeps me going. Thanks very much for what you're doing and what you're going to do, because we're going to stay busy. Okay, have a great day. It's an honor to be here with you, and please carry on. Be safe. Carry on.